en Virginia, y director del Catholic Safeguarding Institute del Centro Emmaus for Psycho-Spiritual Formation en Quezon City, Filipinas. Es psicoterapeuta, consejero pastoral al servicio de personas individuales, parejas, familias, grupos, incluyendo víctimas de abusos y quienes los cometieron. Fue uno de los primeros miembros de la Pontificia Comisión para la Protección de Menores y en 2018 el Papa le nombró para un segundo mandato. El profesor Dr. Diliaco es muy activo en la formación para la protección en diversos ámbitos, ya sea con familias, centros educativos y personas en posición de liderazgo en la Iglesia. Y esto no solo en su país, sino también internacionalmente. En 2018, por ejemplo, participó en el Encuentro Internacional de Familias en Dublín y en noviembre de ese mismo año, 2018, en el encuentro internacional que tuvo lugar en Abu Dhabi, Interfaith Alliance for Safer Communities. No es la primera vez que participa en algún acto organizado en conjunto con la vida consagrada y hoy nos complace darle la bienvenida de nuevo. Muchas gracias, profesor Dr. Gabriel, por acompañarnos. Nos acompaña también Monseñor Luis Manuel Alí Herrera, que es obispo auxiliar de Bogotá, Colombia. Es psicólogo y vicario episcopal para el Centro Estratégico de Comunicación y Participación. También responsable de comunidades religiosas, movimientos laicales y de la formación inicial y permanente de los sacerdotes diocesanos. Como formación, se graduó en Teología en la Universidad Javeriana de Bogotá y es licenciado en Psicología por la Gregoriana de Roma. Ha sido director del área de orientación psicológica del Seminario Mayor de Bogotá, así como profesor de Psicología del Desarrollo Humano, Psicología Social y Psicología Pastoral en el Seminario Mayor. En diciembre de 2014 fue nombrado miembro de la Pontificia Comisión para la Protección de Menores y en noviembre del 2015 el Papa Francisco lo nombró obispo auxiliar de la Arquidiócesis de Bogotá. En 2018 el Papa renovó su nombramiento para un segundo mandato en la Pontificia Comisión. Gracias por acompañarnos, Monseñor, bienvenido. Nos acompaña también la hermana Alice Yacan, que pertenece al Instituto de las Hermanas del Sagrado Corazón de Jesús, en Uganda, donde ha trabajado en los últimos 28 años, especialmente al servicio de los niños y niñas. Profesionalmente es abogada civil, muy comprometida en la promoción de los derechos humanos, especialmente de los derechos de los niños. Ha trabajado con el gobierno de Uganda en el Departamento de Justicia Juvenil, defendiendo a niños y niñas ante la Corte Civil para que se les aplicaran sentencias adecuadas a su edad y características. Participó en un grupo de trabajo de la National Alternative Care Framework. Coordinó uno de los programas de la Conferencia de Religiosos en Uganda sobre la protección de menores. Y colaboró también en la elaboración de políticas de protección para la vida consagrada y para la conferencia episcopal de su país, Uganda. Actualmente se encuentra en Nairobi, desde donde se conecta con nosotros, estudiando en la Catholic University of Eastern Africa para obtener la licenciatura en Derecho Canónico. Gracias también, hermana Alice, por acompañarnos. Bienvenida. Y finalmente nos acompaña el hermano Brendan Giri, que va a coordinar esta mesa redonda. Es un hermano marista escocés, psicólogo clínico y psicoterapeuta. Ha sido provincial de los hermanos maristas en la provincia de Europa Centro-Oeste de 2010 a 2019. Antes trabajó como profesor, director espiritual y psicoterapeuta, especializándose en el trabajo con víctimas de abuso sexual, así como con quienes cometieron los abusos. Ha trabajado en el Reino Unido, particularmente como director de formación humana en el Ashow College, que es el seminario para sacerdotes del norte de Inglaterra, pero también en África y Estados Unidos. Ha ofrecido y ofrece seminarios en los 4 continentes en áreas relacionadas con la psicología, el desarrollo humano, la sexualidad y la espiritualidad. Y tiene numerosas publicaciones relacionadas con el abuso sexual, con el counseling y con la espiritualidad. Quizás de estas publicaciones destacaría Child Sexual Abuse, que es parte de un libro conjunto de Christian Handbook of Abuse, Addiction and Difficult Behavior, y también 2 libros me parece importantes en esta área, escritos en colaboración con Joan Marie Greer, Sexual Issues y The Dark Night of the Catholic Church. Actualmente, hermano Brendan es miembro de la Comisión Conjunta de las 2 uniones de superiores generales para el cuidado y la protección. Como ven, pues, una buena representación de continentes, de culturas, de manera de ser en la Iglesia. Seguro que va a ser una mesa redonda muy enriquecedora para todos nosotros. Brendan, la palabra contigo para empezar a escuchar ya a todos los que van a participar en la mesa redonda. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Emily. Thank you for your generous words. And also, thank you to everyone who is participating in this meeting. I can welcome you to Glasgow via Zoom in Scotland, and I'm delighted when I see the names of all the countries that are emerging as the participants connect to our webinar today. The topic is undoubtedly important, safeguarding and enculturation, and I'm delighted that we have 3 speakers who will contribute to our roundtable today. Regarding preparation, what we're going to do is Bishop Herrera will speak first, then Gabby, and then Sister Alice. After each speaker, I'll create a space where you can add things to the chat. Many of us have experience of Zoom now, and it's a wonderful resource. But to avoid distractions as people are speaking, we're going to ask you just to discipline yourself in the knowledge that after each speaker, there'll be a pause and you can put in any comments or questions. After all 3 speakers have made their presentations for about 15-20 minutes, I'll create a longer pause, a bit of a health break, when you can direct a question to an individual speaker if you want by putting their name first, or if it's a general comment or question, leave it open. And during that time, I'll look at the chat with the help of Claudia and Patricia to work out if there's areas of questions that we can then put to one of the 3 speakers or to any of the speakers to make sure they all contribute in the feedback. So that's the way we're going to structure things today. And I look forward to your participation and to us all being enriched and enlightened by what we hear and share today. So without any further words, it's now my pleasure to hand over to Bishop Herrera, whom I met when I did a previous facilitation with the Pontifical Commission, and I'm delighted to be engaging with him again. Bishop Herrera, over to you.
Muchas gracias, les agradezco mucho la invitación que me han realizado. Me siento en casa cuando estoy con las 2 uniones de superiores generales porque no solamente en mi arquidiócesis y en mi país, sino en toda Latinoamérica. Hemos realizado un trabajo conjunto, especialmente con la CLAR, con la hermana Gloria Liliana Franco y con la comisión de la CLAR con la hermana Rosaura González de México, sobre todo este tema. Bueno, entonces voy a compartir pantalla, voy a iniciar mi exposición en este momento. Tengo el privilegio de hacer parte de una cultura latinoamericana que valora a sus niños, niñas y adolescentes y tiene una capacidad innata de sentir empatía y afecto por las personas vulnerables. Esto lo podemos constatar más en nuestros pueblos indígenas, en la organización social de nuestros campesinos y en la cultura híbrida de nuestras grandes metrópolis latinoamericanas y del Caribe, donde el cariño y la protección por los menores de edad y las personas vulnerables se respira en tantas iniciativas sociales y comunitarias. Quiero preguntar a los traductores si estoy bien de velocidad, ¿así está bien? ¿O hablo más despacio?
Está bien.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. También me siento orgulloso de tener raíces siro-libanesas. Mi primer apellido es Ali, porque mi abuelo era de Siria, de Homs. Y dentro de mi familia paterna he aprendido el aprecio innato por la niñez y por los que viven en las periferias existenciales. Recuerdo un consejo que me dio un parroquiano mío de un pueblo del norte del Líbano que vivía hacía más de 40 años en mi nación colombiana. Eso me lo dijo hace 28 años, cuando yo era un sacerdote muy joven, de pocos meses de ordenado. Cuando visites una familia, trata a todos con respeto y cariño. Venera a sus ancianos y pídele su bendición. Dile siempre lo bien alimentados e inteligentes que son sus niños. Y a la ama de casa que te dio de comer, no ahorres elogios por su mesa y diles que por su sazón te sentiste en un hogar acogedor. Es el cariño y el aprecio que tenemos en nuestro ADN latinoamericano por nuestros menores y ancianos. Sin embargo, nuestras culturas latinoamericanas también tienen sus sombras en el trato tanto con los menores, en el trato con los menores de edad, tanto en los ambientes rurales como en los ambientes urbanos. Voy a poner el reflector en tres actitudes que se perciben en nuestras sociedades cuando debemos encarar situaciones tan dolorosas como la violencia sexual contra menores, la trata infantil, la violencia intrafamiliar, tanto contra menores como también contra ancianos y personas vulnerables, la pornografía y la prostitución infantil. La primera actitud que vemos es un desconocimiento de la situación. No sabemos lo que es la violencia sexual contra niñas, niños y adolescentes. Desconocemos los riesgos que esto genera y las implicaciones que esto conlleva. La segunda actitud es la negación. Aunque el abuso esté aconteciendo en el círculo familiar y aunque se tenga las señales de alarma, se minimiza, se toleran los comportamientos abusivos de la familia. Es más, cuando se hace evidente la agresión, no se denuncia o por vergüenza o por temor. En mi país, Colombia, el año pasado se aumentó un 11.2% los abusos de violencia sexual y el 86.8% de los casos cometidos fueron contra menores de edad. Y una grandísima mayoría de estos eran contra niñas. Como acontecen en tantos otros contextos socioculturales, la mayor parte de los agresores son cercanos a la víctima. En el 45.8% el agresor es un familiar y en el 46% es un conocido o un amigo. En estos últimos años, con el aumento del turismo, sobre todo en algunos de nuestros países latinoamericanos, también hubo un incremento de la trata de menores de edad y la explotación sexual de los adolescentes, con el aumento exponencial. Además, con el aumento exponencial de los migrantes venezolanos, especialmente a países como Colombia, Ecuador, Perú, Panamá y Chile, también han aumentado los desmanes contra los menores migrantes venezolanos que se han reportado cada vez más. Y algo que constatamos, sobre todo en estos meses de pandemia, es que se aumentó dramáticamente los delitos cibernéticos contra los menores de edad. La tercera actitud que se observa en la sociedad y en los contextos latinoamericanos es el permisivismo, que se constata en la ausencia de límites relacionales. Muchas veces por la pobreza extrema que hace que los menores no tengan su privacidad y el sentido del pudor no pueda ser enseñado desde el hogar. Pero también por contextos culturales, como la música rap o la música llamada reggaetón, abiertamente sexualizadas en sus letras de las canciones y en sus bailes. Y que es consumida por niñas, niños y adolescentes sin ninguna restricción parental. En algunos sectores de nuestra sociedad, todavía se promueven los reinados de belleza de niñas y adolescentes, donde se tolera la hipersexualización desde la temprana edad. Todo esto se complica con unos sistemas legales que están inundados de leyes y normas para favorecer a los menores y personas vulnerables, pero que en la práctica adolecen de los mecanismos de implementación y organismos de control. Uno de los ejemplos más patéticos que estamos viviendo es la ausencia de reglamentación en las plataformas digitales que se constata en toda la región. Estas tres actitudes, tan ampliamente percibidas en nuestra sociedad latinoamericana, demuestra cuán importante es el factor cultural en el tema de la protección de menores y personas vulnerables, ya que la violencia sexual es un problema social. Permítanme entonces insistir en dos puntos. Primero, en la actitud de Jesús hacia los niños. Y segundo, en el entorno protector para los niños. El primero, la actitud de Jesús hacia los niños. Vemos en el texto del Evangelio de San Mateo y lo leemos, que en aquel momento los discípulos se acercaron a Jesús para preguntarle, ¿quién es el más grande en el reino de los cielos? Jesús llamó a un niño, lo puso en medio de ellos y dijo, les aseguro que si ustedes no cambian y no se hacen como niños, no entrarán en el reino de los cielos. Por lo tanto, el que se haga pequeño como este niño será el más grande en el reino de los cielos. El que reciba a uno de estos pequeños en mi nombre, me recibe a mí mismo. El contexto en el que Jesús dio su lección sobre los niños fue el manejo del poder. Así lo recuerda el comienzo del pasaje del Evangelio que acabamos de leer. En una ocasión en que los apóstoles discutían sobre problemas de jerarquías entre ellos, se acercan hacia Jesús para preguntarle quién considera él que es el mayor en el reino. En medio del intimidante mundo de los adultos, sedientos de poder, Jesús pone a un pequeño en el centro. Jesús no se puso en el centro a sí mismo, sino a un niño. Puso en el centro al más inerme y desarmado, al más indefenso y sin derechos, al más débil y despreciado. Al hacerse como niños, es la condición de la entrega en el reino de Dios. Se trata, como dice el mismo Jesús, de una conversión que consiste en reaprender la vida poniéndose en el lugar del niño. El niño conoce como ninguno la confianza y se abandona sin reservas. Él no filosofa ni entiende de leyes. Sabe de sorpresas, de juegos y de sonrisas. Solo un niño muestra su sonrisa cuando todavía no ha terminado de secarse las lágrimas de sus mejillas, pues no sabe de filtros ni convenciones sociales. Expresa las emociones tal como son. En presencia de una vida tierna, se juega dos posibilidades. O se puede hacer crecer o se puede hacer destruir. O se puede rechazar y despreciar o se acepta a esta persona. Pero para Jesús solo vale una opción, pues él mismo se coloca en el lugar del niño. El que reciba a un niño como este en mi nombre, a mí me recibe. El niño es imagen de Jesús. Esto es sorprendente, pues el omnipotente Dios se manifiesta en la pequeñez de un niño. Hoy, los niños siguen siendo un punto ciego. En no pocas ocasiones son instrumentalizados, utilizados para catapultar ideologías políticas y hasta religiosas. Son objetos de consumo, otros de explotación o de proyección de las frustraciones de sus padres. El padre Hans Zollner escribió un agudo artículo en Theological Studies titulado El niño en el centro, donde reclama un desarrollo más extenso en la reflexión y en la investigación de la teología sistemática. Recuerda además aquel artículo de Karl Rahner en 1963, Ideas para una teología de la infancia. Y la propuesta en el pensamiento protestante iniciado en 1996 sobre el movimiento de la teología del niño. Cuando hablamos entonces de inculturar en nuestros ambientes eclesiales toda propuesta que tenga como objetivo la protección de nuestras niñas, niños, adolescentes y personas vulnerables, se debe tener en cuenta su punto de vista, su manera de pensar, su visión de la realidad. En Italia se conoce el proyecto del sociólogo Francesco Tonucci, llamado La ciudad de los niños, en la que se propone a las alcaldías de las ciudades una nueva filosofía de gobierno, una nueva filosofía de gobierno de la ciudad, adoptando como parámetro el niño. Él representa al otro, a todos los otros, todos los que piensan y razonan de manera diferente a un adulto, como es el caso de las personas en estados vulnerables. Muchas de nuestras ciudades se han adaptado más a las exigencias de los coches que al de las personas. Los niños han perdido las ciudades, la posibilidad del juego, la exploración, la aventura. Y las grandes urbes, al perder a los niños, han perdido seguridad, control social y también solidaridad por los más vulnerables. Puede ser también que esto esté sucediendo en nuestras parroquias y en ciertas instituciones eclesiales. Este año, en nuestra Semana para el Buen Trato, que realizamos todos los años en nuestro país, en la segunda semana de noviembre, invitamos a unos niños y adolescentes que nos ayudaran a crear la campaña dirigida a ellos. Y ellos nos propusieron que no solo los tuviésemos a ellos en cuenta como sujetos de maltrato y abuso, sino también a los ancianos y a las personas discapacitadas. Así nació en nuestra arquidiócesis nuestra campaña Yo fui tú serás yo. Una semana para que las familias se permitan espacios únicos de comunicación para entenderse y recuperar el valor de la palabra. Hasta aquí mi primer punto. Ahora el segundo punto. El entorno protector para los niños. Cuando reconocemos que el factor cultural es importante para la protección de menores y personas vulnerables, necesitamos tener en cuenta los entornos en los que se desarrolla su vida. Sin duda, el más importante es la familia, y es el primero que se manifiesta como un ambiente protector para nuestros menores. Así fue para Jesús. Para la época en que nace en Palestina, Palestina está bajo el dominio del Imperio Romano y Galilea bajo la mano de un rey, Herodes, y Jerusalén de un prefecto romano, Poncio Pilato, mientras en Roma gobernaba el emperador Augusto. Es decir, Jesús nace en un momento de un viaje arriesgado impuesto por el decreto del emperador romano de hacer un censo, que tiene el propósito que Roma conozca hasta dónde llegan los dominios y así poder cobrar más impuestos. Esto marca la pauta de un contexto hostil. Además, recordemos que hay un mandato del rey Herodes de matar los niños menores de 2 años para poder garantizar su poder y evitar así que cualquier heredero usurpe su realeza. En medio de este panorama nace Jesús. Por eso Dios debe proveer para él una familia que lo ame, pero también que lo cuide y proteja de tanta hostilidad. Y esta hostilidad no se hizo esperar. Pues tiempo después, nos encontramos con esta realidad de la Sagrada Familia que relata Mateo en el capítulo 2, versículo 13. Después de la partida de los magos, el ángel del Señor se apareció en sueños a José y le dijo: levántate, toma al niño y a su madre, huye a Egipto y permanece allí hasta que yo te avise, porque Herodes va a buscar al niño para matarlo. José se levantó, tomó de noche al niño y a su madre y se fue a Egipto. Este ícono refleja con precisión la primera responsabilidad de los padres: ser un entorno protector para sus hijos. Sabemos que el 80% de los abusos contra los menores de edad en la sociedad acontece en las familias, La gran cantidad de agresores son familiares o personas cercanas a la familia. Si un abuso sexual o maltrato infantil contra una persona vulnerable acontece en un hogar católico que está llamado a ser iglesia doméstica y el agresor es un católico bautizado, sea un padre, padrastro, tío o padrino, ¿acaso este abuso no acontece también dentro de la iglesia? Siempre me ha impactado este cuadro que les comparto en este momento. Se encuentra en un santuario franciscano en una región de Colombia llamada Boyacá, en un pueblo indígena llamado Monguí, que en la actualidad, sobre todo en la plaza principal y en las calles aledañas, conserva el estilo arquitectónico de hace 400 años, la época de la colonia española y la evangelización de los pueblos indígenas. La Sagrada Familia de Nazaret, según relata este cuadro, se encuentra en un lugar intermedio de su agotador camino hacia Egipto. Al fondo aparecen los secuaces de Herodes, a la derecha, abajo, que no descansan en su propósito de matar a Jesús. En primer plano se encuentra José, con la vestimenta propia de un campesino con raíces indígenas en los tiempos de nuestra colonia. Es un cuadro que asume las tradiciones propias de la región campesina que pretende ser catequizada. Expresa el esfuerzo de los primeros misioneros franciscanos para inculturar el evangelio en el corazón de los nativos. Y lo hace mostrando a San José con ese rostro varonil, pero reposado. Él es el responsable de proteger a la joven madre y a su hijo amenazado. San José, el protector de Jesús, es la imagen de una iglesia que es un hogar seguro para nuestros menores que se nos encomienda. La familia, sin duda alguna, no es el único entorno protector para los menores y personas vulnerables. También lo son la escuela, la iglesia y ahora más que nunca el entorno digital. Todos deben estar interconectados y ayudarse y apoyarse mutuamente para brindar una protección satisfactoria para nuestros niños, niñas, adolescentes y personas vulnerables. Pero sin duda, es el hogar el que marca la pauta e inicia y perdura este proceso. Permítanme terminar presentándoles una de las iniciativas que estamos realizando desde nuestro trabajo de generar una cultura para el buen trato, para nuestros menores y personas vulnerables. Para nuestra cultura latinoamericana son muy importantes las telenovelas. Desde hace 2 meses, en la arquidiócesis y en nuestro trabajo que hacemos desde la oficina, lanzamos en las plataformas digitales gratuitamente, ustedes lo pueden conseguir allí en YouTube, una telenovela de 10 minutos de duración cada capítulo, que todos los viernes por la noche presentamos a todas las personas que lo quieran ver. Sobre todo, sobre temas que estamos viviendo en esta pandemia. Situaciones emocionales complejas que vivimos en la familia. Tratamos temas como la violencia intrafamiliar, el trabajo forzado infantil. En esta foto ustedes ven que este capítulo 9 es sobre el trabajo forzado infantil. Las plataformas digitales y la relación que tienen nuestros niños y adolescentes con ellas. Es una manera de inculturar este tema propiamente en nuestro contexto latinoamericano que gusta tanto de las telenovelas. Todos estos esfuerzos hacemos para que nuestra iglesia sea un hogar seguro. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Thank you, Bishop Herrera, for that introduction to the idea of a theology of safeguarding, also adding in many important bits of information about the scale of abuse in our societies. Before I invite Gabby to make his presentation from a psychological formation perspective, let's just take a moment in case anyone wants to put anything in the chat in terms of a question to Bishop Herrera for him to consider, or any observations you might want to share. Then after Gabby's talk, I'll do the same thing so that people might be able to add some ideas or chat at that time. Then, as say, after the third conversation, I'll look at the various ideas and then put some ideas and questions to our three speakers. Brother Emili has already introduced Gabby. Gabby and I first met many years ago in Baltimore as students, so it's my pleasure to hand over to him to do his presentation on psychological and formation perspectives on safeguarding and inculturation. Over to you, Gabby.
Thank you, Brother Brendan, and thank you, Bishop Manuel. So I will just share my screen here. Okay, so I will be talking about a few ideas that I've put together over the years on safeguarding ministry and enculturation within a psychological and formation perspective. And if the translators can let me know if I'm going too fast, that would be wonderful. So the enculturation perspective that I am drawing upon is what was stated in a 1988 document by the International Theological Commission entitled Faith and Culture. And they quote the meaning of enculturation from the Extraordinary Synod on the 20th anniversary of the closing of the Second Vatican Council. And the definition is this: the intimate transformation of authentic cultural values through their integration in Christianity and in the various human cultures. Being a person myself who grew up in my family speaking English, I understand what this means in English. And I think that's just the point I would like to make note of right now. Sorry. And I will add on to this point later on throughout this short talk. The key words from this phrase are intimate, transformation, authentic, cultural values, integration in Christianity, rather than, I thought this was very interesting, rather than Christianity being integrated to culture, it is cultural values being integrated into Christianity. And then various human cultures. So we've been using the word culture a lot during this session. And I draw upon a definition also given by, in the 1988 document on faith and culture. This was a summary of what the International Theological Commission at that time believed to be the Church's definition of culture, where culture refers to everything whereby man develops and perfects his many bodily and spiritual qualities. So it refers to everything in and through which human beings develop. Develop in what? In being human, more and more in one's dignity, etc., etc. When we look at these keywords from a psychological perspective, the order in which they are treated or addressed changes. Why is that? With psychological approaches, especially the applied or practical ones like clinical psychology or organizational psychology, what a psychologist does is typically begin with the present human experience rather than begin with a theory. And in the from the document, The Understanding of Inculturation, where I see the present human experience is in the term various human cultures. So there's a recognition that there are many different human cultures through which a human being develops and, if you will, struggle for perfection. Yeah? And beginning with the present experience of the person or the organization, a psychologist will ask questions and perform techniques in the uh, conversation, maybe supplemented or assisted by some analyses of the meanings of these experiences for the person or for the organization and how they function. So they'll draw out what is of value and help the person or organization draw out what is of value. So that's where, from the culture, you have a culture in the individual, a culture in the organization. A psychologist can help them discern what are the values. At the level of experience, I assume that many of you know from your own life experience and many travels throughout the world that there are things in experience that are very different in very different cultures. And there are also things that are similar or maybe even the same, especially when you're at the level of what is valued, what is important, what are the principles. There is a gray area, however, in between the actual experience and what is valued. And I'll speak more about that later. This gray area, as a psychologist, I label it interpretation. How the person in a particular culture interprets a particular experience according to what is valued in that culture. Not only what, but how it is valued. And this is where there seem to be cultural differences and individual differences in experience. Another key, then from there, if it's, for example, a growth counseling that assists in the human formation of a religious or a candidate or a someone with final profession already, or uh, or ordination, ordained already. Part of the task of the psychologist is not only to help the person function, but in the context of this life of vocation to religious life or priesthood, to help the person have a more conscious awareness and sense of their authentic selves and an authentic sense of service. Then the next one, I think, in the psychological treatment would be intimate. This conversation, whether it's between a psychologist and the organization, like maybe leadership of the diocese or the presbyterium or the religious formators or formans, to be able to discuss this, there is a trust that needs to be established. And as this trust is established, there is a change in the level and depth and quality of the relationship, where from the beginning, impersonal and maybe very professional, to later on, as you go deeper, still very professional, but more with a greater trust. There's more private information that is revealed, a sense of opening up. If it's the individual, opening up the self. If it's the organization, opening up about the details of the life in the diocese or life among the religious. Now, transformation. When it comes to the use of psychology in formation, the aim is transformation, but at the same time, the psychologist will have the attitude of the motivation for any changes that are made must come from the person or the organization. And these motivations for changes depend highly on several things. One factor involved are the cultural values and perceptions and misperceptions. These heavily influence a motivation to change. Then there are individual personal characteristics, but there is a cultural level of influence. And the aim, ideally, is an integration, which has a there are different nuances on the meaning of integration in psychology and what a psychologist or psychological approach can help bring to the formation process and experience of a person and a community. And I will discuss that a little bit in a few minutes. So the starting points I want to point out here are different, no? In the document and in the psychological approach. Now, what is the relation of these to safeguarding? Just to review, the perspective or safeguarding model I am using is this tripod of relational safety, which assumes a safe self. When a person is formed in this sense of safe self, relational safety, openness, transparency, honesty, authenticity, integrity, etc., safe affectivity, this person can live this out and be supported in living out this sense of safety in relationships within a safe community, because the others are also formed this way. No? And these two, from the individual and the community, be it diocesan or religious, so the person, the relational environment, support what needs to be implemented and acted in the ministries so that all of these are ensure safety from abusive relationships, abuses of power, abuses of persons, etc., etc. And formation and safeguarding, in this sense, share common contexts of relationship and mission. The relationship aspect I've touched on already, and it's in the previous slide where you saw the graphic. In terms of mission, both formation and safeguarding have the mission, at least one among the important ones, of helping people respond to the grace of God to draw close to Christ by being configured to Christ. In one of our Holy Father's homilies on sexual abuse in the church and the protection of minors, which he gave on 7 July 2014 at the Chapel of Santa Marta in the Vatican, he talked about the spiritual root, as he sees it, of this problem of sexual abuse in the church, especially by those who are consecrated. And to paraphrase what he said, and some of you may recall this from previous webinars or workshops, he said these men who were consecrated their lives to Christ brought these boys and girls to the altar of their own concupiscence instead of sacrificing their lives to bring these boys and girls to Christ. No? And in my work as a consultant to religious communities and formators and diocesan formation teams, this idea of configuration to Christ, helping the formand develop in a particular culture so that the person knows how, on a daily basis, in daily ordinary activities, to make a conscious effort more and more to receive this configuration grace and to live it out. And my understanding of formation in recent times is there is a focus on the whole person, or at least this is more articulated and using psychological terms as well. Well, the whole person focus involves the psychological, the affective, the sexual, the interpersonal, intellectual, physical, and moral aspects, all of these rooted in the spiritual aspect of one's life. In safeguarding, there is the application of this whole person perspective, these various dimensions of life which mentally, conceptually, we identify and separate out are really all in one person. They are there. There are dimensions of the one person who is the formand or the religious or the priest. And they have a relationship amongst each other in the one person. And this relationship is also a process. It can be in the process of integrating more and more. There's more intimacy there, more authenticity, more transformation, more commitment. Or it can be in the process of becoming fragmented, in the person. And then there's disingenuity, a lack of transformation. inability to make use of the means of formation. So safeguarding applies this whole person perspective to forming a person in the aspects of Christ, whom we are ideally to emulate, now called to emulate, in one's own way, in one's own in the charism in which God is one is called to by God, that make the person relationally safe. How safe? Well, the goal is to be as safe as Christ himself, with the assumption that this aspect of formation, the safeguarding aspect, will help the person allow the grace of the pattern of Christ's life being reproduced in oneself and in one's relationships in a way that allows everyone to approach. And eventually, this relationship with others uh, helps a person, the other person, interacting with the religious or interacting with the priest, helps this other person get closer to Christ. Okay, so well and good. Now, when it comes to practical matters in safeguarding, like touch, like talking about sex, like transparency, how to practice it, accountability, how to practice it, one hears many different appeals to culture. Uh, and maybe the problem has been because these words were, I guess, maybe in the context of safeguarding, popularized in the English language by the English speaking countries. So there might be some reaction there. But nevertheless, that these things are done differently in one's culture. Or, for example, one thing I heard from the Asian region is that transparency will not work in Asia because it is too shameful. Now, the idea there about the transparency that was mentioned in that encounter I had, the idea behind it was publishing everything in all the newspapers and everywhere. Okay, um, based on one of the person's experiences in a Western English-speaking country. Now, however, my point here is that there are certain universal principles that ensure one's development or a person's development in human dignity. And there are universal principles as well that can be seen in safeguarding and that can be seen across the various human cultures that we have in which the church recognizes are present and which the church recognizes. These various human cultures are the very milieu whereby people develop and as human beings, both bodily and spiritually. And bodily includes psychology. You know? If you take a look at neuroscience research, the nervous system and body are very much involved in a person's psychology and the development of the mind. The old terms are the intellect and the will. The body is very much involved. I think where people have objections, and which is a very important objection, is how to contextualize these principles. The question of, okay, I understand the principle. Let's say I'm the one asking. I understand the idea of inculturation in the document, let's say from Theological Commission, International Theological Commission. But how do I do this in my culture? And what I'd like to propose is that because there are different cultures, And there are different ways of interpreting principles. That the principles need to be contextualized into the language and practices of particular cultures. In what way? Because it cannot just be according to the culture. That is the opposite of inculturation as defined in the document. Right? Inculturation is integrating authentic cultural values into Christianity. So it's not integrating Christianity into the culture. So to contextualize safeguarding mission into the languages and practices of particular culture, that has the effect of activating this intimate transformation of authentic cultural values through their integration in Christianity. Okay, so going back to the psychological perspective, as I understand it, on these key words. So, various human cultures, there's the idea of variation. Okay, variation is a very important idea in psychology. The fact that there are differences between individuals is part of a psychologist's understanding of how individuals have uniqueness, for example, because there are individual differences in personality traits, in motivations, in emotional expression, in the interpretation of emotional experience. There are individual differences in the assignment of meaning to experiences. And this happens also at the social cultural level. There are real variations in language, expressions of affection, interpretations of behaviors, and expectations as well of how interpersonal development occurs and what the outcomes will be. There are differences between there are negative things, and these are also positive things. So there are negative aspects of culture. In the context of this talk, the negative aspects of culture, I am thinking, are the ones which make people less authentic. Now, the positive ones are the ones that enhance or contribute to this authenticity that was in the definition earlier. At the level, so this is at the level of human experience, number one. Number two, then at the level of values, there's an abstraction that occurs. You draw out and reflect. These values reflect how and which attitudes, affections, behaviors, beliefs, and thoughts are given importance in a particular culture of people. Now, for example, one of the characteristics along which cultures vary, there are cultural differences, is the value of individualism. In some cultures, more value is placed on the individual and individual rights, and individual expression. In other cultures, more value is placed on common rights, the nation, how do I say, or the family, as opposed to the individual rights, right? Now, what's interesting in psychological research on this particular cultural value of individualism on one end of the pole, going across to collectivism, or the value of the group on the other end of the pole, is that even among, let's say, countries that generally highly value individualism, there are subcultures and there are differences in how much it is valued versus the group or the family. And also in cultures that are very, very much group-oriented, family-oriented, the group, the good of the group, the good of the nation, the good of the family comes before my own good. There are also variations in levels of valuing that and how it's expressed. Yeah? Now, so using the language of one's own culture, the language of affection, touch is a very touchy subject. You know, what is good touch and what is bad touch? Everyone can understand, yes, there can be a good touch and there can be a bad way of touching. But in my culture, there might be some differences. We have very positive, for example, in the Philippines, we have very positive signs of affection. And one of the challenges and tasks which I've asked priests and religious to help us out with in the Philippines is to begin to identify more consciously what are the positive ways so that people have a guide, you know, to know what is not good. And it cannot be just no touch at all in the Philippines, because in the Philippines, not being able to express affection with certain types of touch, which are very appropriate in our culture, means that you're rejecting the person. It has a very strong psychological stigma, and it's very hurtful. But I've challenged them, and they've agreed to the challenge, not to define, begin in my culture, what does it mean to what is a innocent hug? You know? What how do I ask? Is it all right to put my hand here or on your shoulder, or may I shake your hand? How do you do that? How do we do that in our own dialect, with our own cultural behaviors, with our own nuanced expressions of affection? And what is too much? What goes beyond the border? So going to authenticity, what is the principle? And how is it practiced in this particular culture? What is the principle of authenticity? Intimacy, what is the principle? And how is it practiced in a culture? Your culture, or the culture in the country you're in, where you're serving, in your ministry or mission or assignment. You know, so intimacy, let's say one definition of intimacy could be, or one principle behind it is, one is able to bear all. Okay. How is it practiced in the culture? Is it practiced in a way that transforms into what is more like Christ? Or is it practiced in a way that abuses the trust that comes with intimacy? Transformation refers specifically in psychology to change behaviors associated with people making changes in their lives, substantial changes, and the motivation to change. And taken together, these are seen as a process, not a one-time thing.
Could I just gently ask us to try to move along, because Sister's presentation's still to come?
Sure. Yes. I'm sorry. This is my last. This is my ending already.
Yeah.
And then finally, the integration. No? In psychology, it's the acceptance of and harmonizing of various aspects of the vast range of one's experience of being a human person, with a sense of wholeness and a sense of direction and purpose. And this is displayed in a conscious decisions to act with integrity. Okay, so what do these mean? Practically, well, let's take a look at Jesus's life. What I understand is, and I'm going to end with this, that he did not, when he went out and preached, he did not try to make people understand ideas from the Greek intellectual tradition, which was the tradition of the time. But he entered into the language and the behaviors and the attitudes of the people and contextualized those in terms of his message. And I'll end there. Safeguarding needs to be done this way too.
Gabby, many thanks for that multi-layered presentation, going from culture, psychology, formation, theology. It's a very, very rich mixture, and I saw a very positive comment from someone thanking you for an insight. Can we just take a very small moment in case anyone wants to share a comment or question to Gabby? There's a video of Sister Alice, I gather, and it lasts for 20 minutes. So we'll have our brief moment just now when you can write if you want to. Then we'll have our video. Then there'll be a time to gather any of the comments or questions that you have put in the chat, and we'll try to give those to our three presenters to interact with your questions and proposals. Thank you, everyone. Can we now move to listen to Sister Alice's presentation, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sister Alice Jachan, belonging to the Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in Uganda. I am a civil lawyer by profession and a human rights activist in the area of child protection. I thank the International Union of Superiors General for giving me this opportunity to share with you my passion for protection of children. Child protection is a global cry. Nowhere is safe for children. The very institutions that are supposed to be caring for children, they turn to be abusive to the children. Abuses occur in the families, in churches, and in schools where we entrust our children. The rationale for protection of children, if I take Ugandan case in Africa, is that of pervasiveness of child abuse, maltreatment, and neglect, and these need our actions. In Uganda, the study that was taken in 2016 portrayed that 51% of children population are either moderately or critically vulnerable. Over 2.2 million children under the age of 18 are orphans. About 2.5 million children living with some form of disabilities in Uganda. Over 31,000 children between the age of 10 to 17 are heading households. About 40,000 children live in residential child care institutions, that is orphanages. Approximately 10,000 live on the street with no adult care. More than half of 15 to 19-year-old girls have experienced physical or sexual violence. About 26 girls are defiled every day in Uganda. 8 in 10 children in primary and secondary schools experience sexual violence. And so these statistics is very alarming and calls for urgent need for protection. Why should we protect children? Children are vulnerable and disadvantaged by virtue of their age, weak status in society, their needs, economic dependence, slim resilience, lack of voice, dependence, low sense of judgment, low perception of risk, and other childhood qualities. They are very, very innocent. They depend on us. And if we tell them to do anything, they do without questioning. And therefore, protection of the children is very, very, very much needed. Children without the needed protection like these ones, like those in poverty, vulnerability, are increasingly facing severe harm on their psychological functioning and overall development. Many children in Uganda, for instance, for varying reasons, are exposed to various exploitation, abuse, and neglect. Such children are at risk of death, poor physical and mental health, HIV infection, educational problem, displacement, homelessness, and poor parenting skills later in life. Globally, the legal frameworks on child protection are there. The international laws, the regional laws, the national legal framework, and national policies and guidelines that support effective programming for alternative care are in place. The international legal frameworks, one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, the Conventions on the Rights of the Child, the CRC, African Charter on the Right and the Welfare of the Child, the United Nations Care Guidelines, the United Nations Declarations on Social and Legal Principles relating to the protection and welfare of children. The UDHR, which is formulated, enacted in 1948, and we all recall that that was immediately after the World War II. The world leaders came together and saw how much children suffered, and so they came up with rules, law to protect children. Under Article 25(2) of the UDHR, it provides that motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. That means all children shall enjoy the same social protection in all environments. The CRC is formulated and enacted in 1989. Under this, almost all the state leaders ratified to this convention. It provides for basic child protection principles with the implications on alternative care. It gives the definition of a child, non-discrimination of principle, best interest of the child principle, right to life, survival, development, right to have their views heard and represented, and the CRC places emphasis on raising children in a family environment. The African Charter, enacted in 1990, it re-echoes the basic principles which was enumerated by the CRC. It emphasizes that family environment most appropriate for the growth and development of a child in its preamble. Article 18 of the African Charter places responsibilities. Article 21 gives alternative care options. Foster care as kinship in shares by Africans, because in Africa, children are raised communally. So the kinship care, that if a child should lack the really biological parents, and then kinship care, the close relatives take care of this child. Article 25(2), that the best option is reunification of the child with the family when a child is away from the family. The United Nations guidelines of 2009 propose implementations of the CRC in Article 20. Relevant provisions of these CRCs regarding protection and well-being of children deprived of the parental care. It provides guidelines on the following principle: necessity. If a child is supposed to leave the parent, is it necessary? Appropriateness, is it appropriate for this child to be away from the biological parent? And if a child is away, this child must maintain close contact with the child and the family. The best interest of the child must be key. The best interest of the child is not pampering the child, but that which is developmental for the child, like education. Preference for family-based care. If foster care or kinship care is to take place, they give exactly a family-based care than maybe institutional care. And here, the principles say institutionalized care as the last resort because of varying reasons. Financial and material poverty alone, not justification for alternative care, because globally everyone is poor. Non-ulterior motive. I will give here something about Uganda. In just 20 years period, the child care institutions, orphanages rose from just 36 to over 600. And some of these were for income generating activities because they had ulterior motives. And so people gathered children from their families in one setting and then wrote projects to the donors, and the donors were supportive to them. Then they encouraged them that if you collect more children, we shall give you more fundings. That is what we call ulterior motive. If we are to protect children, we are to help children, then it should rise from non-ulterior motives. Case-by-case based decisions. Every child has his case or her case, and therefore, like institutionalized care, orphanages, children are treated generally, timetable, everything is done together. So a child's need is not taken as an individual, and yet children have to be taken care of case by case. In our national legal framework, Uganda looked at the regional laws and also international laws and came up with their own laws for protection of children. The supreme law is the 1995 Uganda Constitution, which provides that the family is the natural and basic unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. And this is the Article 31 of the Constitution. It provides for adoption as an alternative care option for children whose parents are unknown under Article 11. Minimization of all conditions that may cause undue separation of children with the families. And that also calls for society to make sure that domestic violence is, eradicated, that society, community live in harmony to prevent children from running away from their homes. The Children Act is that piece of legislation, Cap 59, which is amended in 29 to cater for children's protection. It emphasizes on the guiding principle. One is the welfare of the child at all times, whatever you do for the child. The basic principles of the CRC is again re-emphasized under this Children Act. Section 4 of the Children Act put preference for bringing up children under a family environment. Uganda's National Alternative Care Framework of 2012, this underlines a continuum of care. For responses to vulnerable children, it provides lines of response in order of their priority. Also, the law understands that for one reason or another, a child can be separated from the family. And so, if the child is separated, what are these lines of responses for their protection? One is keeping the family together and preventing separation. This is where the advocacy comes in, that all of us are entitled to make sure that families are together. If there is any problem that is suffering with any happening with any family, we have to come together to make sure that that risk is taken away from the family, and children and family is kept together with the children. Emergency care, that orphanages are good places for emergency care, because like war is rampant even in Africa, where children run sometimes together with the adults, and in the camps where they stay, it is better to separate the children so that better care is given to them. So emergency care can be one of the places for that purpose. Reunification. So if war is over, if that risk that caused the separation is over, then the child should be reunified with the family. Foster care. Foster care is the equivalent, like the kinship care in African tradition, that a child whose parents die, the relatives take over. And if the relatives are not there, the community members who are willing, they take over this child, to take care of the child and make the child to develop into a proper human being, useful in the society. Domestic adoption. Domestic adoption under this continuum of care comes before the intercountry adoption. Domestic adoption is preferred. Why? Because if a child is adopted within the country, this child might be adopted by his own tribe mate, with the same language, with the same food type which they can eat, and so this child will cope up easily, other than taking a child to a different environment altogether. But if that fails, then intercountry adoption is preferred. And here, institutional care is the last resort. Why is it the last resort? Institutional care has its own challenges, as I say. It does not give the necessary, development for a child's intellectual, being. And in institutionalized care, children are taken care of, in a bandwagon, kind of. No child is taken care of individually. And so for institutional care to be effective, maybe for health reason, if that child care institution is having some facilities that can help a child who is having some disabilities, then the child can be placed under institutionalized care for that purpose only, and it must be a last resort. As a canon law student, I want to bring us to the knowledge of the church, the canonical understanding of child protection. The church also has laws that protect children. For one, under Canon 1398, there is protection of child's life from birth. For canon law, life begins from birth, and so taking away life of unborn baby is an offense under canon law. Protection of the child and end of marriage under canon 1015 is another protection. What is this? During marriage, the priests, the religious who are preparing the couples are told that in your marriage, God is going to give you children. And so those children must be protected because they are gifts from God. And then under Canon 1071, protection of the children of previous marriage. Maybe one of the partner married before and the partner died, leaving children. So the church emphasized that this new member who is coming in marriage must make sure that he or she takes care of the child who are already found in marriage. Child protection through legitimization. Therefore, if a child is already in this blessed marriage under Canon 913, the law provides that this child must be taken care of morally and spiritually according to the church, so that parents become exemplary. They are the one who lead the prayer for maybe meals, the rosary, and maybe going for masses or for the services on Sundays. They should be the one showing good example for the children to follow, and also baptizing them. Moral and civil obligations of parents towards children. The children takes exactly what their parents are. And if the parents mislead them through bad behavior, bad actions, then the values that is morally upright under Canon 1689 is going to be, undermined. Child protection after the separation of parents. Even when parents, for one reason or another, could not stay together, the church under Canon 1551 provides that these two parents, because of their children, they should make sure that they protect the children by providing for them, for their needs. Child protection through provision of integral growth under Canon 11:13:36. It means the development of the child must be adhered to by the parents. So a child who is in the school going age should not remain at home, should not take care of other siblings, but should be sent to school to develop his or her career and a capacity that will help that child in the future. Child protection against sex offenses. I think this is crucial under Canon 1395. Children, we are guardians of children. We, the church leaders, the clerics, the religious, we are the guardians of the children. And so you cannot show a bad example if you are a guardian. You cannot begin abusing a child under your care. But we hear of a lot of abuses that is taking place by the clerics, by the church leaders, the religious are abusing the children. And even at the Vatican, stringent laws have come in because of that. But also, the canon law gives sanctions as far as dismissal from the offices if a cleric does that. And this complements the civil law, like for Uganda. It also amended the Penal Code Act to provide for aggravated defilement. Whether you are a priest, a religious, or anybody, you are not above the law. If you defile a minor, first the sentence was death sentence. But because death sentence is outlawed in Uganda, now it is for life imprisonment. Why? So that it can provide a deterrent sentence for people to know that it is not good to. So then, kids, let us be children are our future leaders. Children look at us for all direction, and if we mislead them, if we abuse them, then they lose trust totally, and they are lost. That is why they will become really completely useless in the society. Let us join hands together in protection of children. I thank you very much for listening to me, and together we can. Thank you.
Sister Alice, many thanks for your presentation and for preparing it in advance with your sharing about the situation in Uganda and the awareness of the extent of abuse that happens in your own country, which we now know is universal, but also for your exposition of the situation of law and canon law, showing the resource that law can be, especially international law, and how canon law gives us obligations as well as protections for children. Thank you, Sister. Could I just create a small pause in case anyone wants to send a question specifically to Sister Alice or any other general questions? I have also been informed that since it's 20 minutes to go, we can add on 10 minutes, if that's okay with the presenters, in case there's more questions they want to follow up on. A number of questions and observations have been presented in the chat, so I'm presuming that Gabi and Bishop Herrera and Sister Alice can see them and have a look at them. What I'm going to suggest is I could perhaps invite Bishop Herrera to reply to one, then Gabi, and if one comes for Sister Alice, that way each of them get a chance to interact with questioners. Then we'll see what we can manage before the last 10 minutes when we need to wind up. Bishop Herrera, if I can turn to you first. There was an interesting question, which was, how can the church help young seminarians in their formation to become pastors who are psychologically balanced, including the affective psychological dimension of their formation? I'm aware that also touches Gabi's world too, but perhaps that's something you might want to respond to, since you're also a psychologist as well.
Sí, gracias. Si quieres, Gaby, yo comienzo solamente diciendo lo siguiente. Me parece una pregunta sumamente interesante porque es un tema que hemos desarrollado en estos últimos 10 años sobre la formación integral y especialmente la formación en los seminarios mayores de toda la dimensión afectivo, sexual y comunitaria de los jóvenes. Sin duda alguna, debe ser un punto fundamental en la formación integral de los seminaristas, pero también de los jóvenes y las jóvenes que se están formando para ser miembros de comunidades de vida consagrada. Ahora, esta formación no solamente tiene que ser integral, sino también debe ser transversal. Es decir, debe comenzar, digamos, desde el ciclo de propedéutico y atravesar toda la formación inicial y después continuar con la formación permanente. Bien lo sabemos nosotros por los estudios, especialmente de la John Jay, de la doctora Terry, y luego todos los aportes de las investigaciones que contrataron la Conferencia Episcopal Alemana y los informes de la la Comisión Australiana y de igual manera, el último informe, el único que tenemos a disposición, que es de la Universidad Pontificia de Chile, que muchos de los abusos dentro de la iglesia perpetrados por clérigos comienzan a la edad de los 35 a 45 años de edad de los clérigos. Significa que es un punto de vulnerabilidad emocional en la vida sacerdotal y de ministros consagrados, que debemos seguir trabajando en la formación afectivo, sexual y comunitaria de nuestros sacerdotes. Para terminar, entonces, mi respuesta, sin duda alguna, debe ser una formación integral y transversal. Y por último, no puede ser una formación académica solamente. Debe implicar también toda una formación emocional, donde no solo el lenguaje, digamos, de las clases, sino también en otros espacios, se pueda dar esta formación a los jóvenes y a las jóvenes formandas. Y algo muy importante, y aquí conecto con otra pregunta que me hicieron, involucrar a la familia, involucrar a las parroquias, a los fieles laicos. La formación de nuestros formandos y nuestras formandas no solo es un trabajo de los institutos de formación, sino además de todo el santo pueblo fiel de Dios. Y un punto importante es la formación también de la familia para que ella siga formando a los formandos y formandas.
Thank you, Bishop Herrera. Gabby, I'm conscious that the issue of formation touches some of your own interests. Do you want to build on what the Bishop has said at all, or offer comments from your own perspective in the Philippines?
Yes. Would you mind repeating the question again in its entirety?
The question was about how could the church help young seminarians in their formation to become pastors who are psychologically balanced, including the affective and psychological formation?
Okay, thank you. So referring to a 2008 document from the Congregation for Catholic Education on entitled Guidelines on the Use of Psychology in the Formation of Candidates to the Priesthood and in the Ongoing Formation of Priests, if you look at number 10 in that document, it talks about formation incorporating the use of psychology, needing to help the person achieve the needed maturity to live the commitments of a priest or a consecrated religious and a celibate person. And this maturity involves the affections, affectivity, sexuality, and sexual experience, experience of oneself as a sexual being as well, spirituality, intellectual life, moral life, all of these things which Bishop Manuel already mentioned. And I want to highlight the key word there, which is maturity. So if we understand formation from the perspective of helping a person in his or her becoming more and more mature to be able to live the commitments that are present in priestly life or religious life, and to be able to handle, not alone, but together with others, very important. To be able to handle together with others all of the pressures and expectations and stress of this celibate state of life. The concept of maturity has inside it inherently the idea of development over time, of a journey. What I've often encountered in how the various groups I work with speak about formation is it's a certain period of life, whether it's in priestly life or religious life, that is in usually the initial stage, and once it's done, it's over. It's the concept being applied is a stage of life that one goes through and finishes, and then you do something else. However, that idea is diametrically opposed to the idea and human reality of maturing over time. You know, one of the pictures in my presentation was of a person looking at the diamond, right? When in the slide on formation. And I think that's a good metaphor. No? A diamond can be cut and refined in certain ways. However, the jewel maker is limited with what is already there in the diamond, right? So no matter how much the diamond is cut and refined, if the diamond is of a certain level and it has impurities, the jewel maker cannot remove those, but has to work around those. So in a similar manner, by analogy, um, these impurities or characteristics of the diamond, you know, can be compared to in the person what the person brings with them in terms of their capacity to mature in the various areas that formation is supposed to help the person mature in order to over time throughout one's lifetime more and more configure one's life to the life of Christ. So this assumes certain other capacities like capacity for interiority. Now my question to you would be, do your formation structures help your candidates and your priests address the various areas of these in their lives, these various areas in their lives, you know, in a way that is understood and effective in your own cultural milieu? Are those structures present? What I see in many seminaries is an almost exclusive emphasis on intellectual development. In some seminaries, spiritual direction occurs once a semester only. You know, that's more like a informational updating rather than an accompaniment along this journey of configuring to Christ. So they meet once every 4 months, and it's just information giving. There's no accompaniment through the process, through the struggle, through the joys. It's not there. There's no relationship. So what are we communicating to our seminarians? No? So the structures need to be put there in place. Now, someone mentioned in one of the questions that being transparent or authentic implies a certain level of vulnerability. And maybe it's time to begin the discussion within your culture, especially in those cultures where vulnerability can be almost like a taboo, to begin the discussion of what is vulnerability, right? To give people permission and the space and the safety in which they can begin to put their conscious minds to this experience. Because vulnerability is a part of the human experience. No? And if we think about it, Jesus made himself very vulnerable, the ultimate vulnerability being on the cross. So if we're afraid to talk about it, how can we? So that would be the first step, I think. Now, following on Monsignor Bishop Manuel's idea, so the formation must be a ongoing thing. We have to change our mindsets. Formation is for life. It is a journey. It is an ongoing process of this configuration to Christ. It's not by the time I receive final profession, I'm done with formation. Now I'm the expert. No one's going to tell me what to do. We have to change. We cannot continue to foster that mentality in the diocesan seminarians and in the priests. We cannot. It doesn't work. This is one of the things that makes diocesan priests very vulnerable in the first 10 years after ordination to committing a boundary crossing. You know? Because they think they're done, and then they encounter all of these things in the ministry, and there's no support, there's no help. And if they seek out help, they're ostracized. What's wrong with you? Didn't you go through formation? How come you can't handle this? It's a very human thing, but it doesn't work. You know? So we need to change that as well. And I'll stop now. I can go on and on forever. So.
Thanks, Gabby,
Yeah.
but the clock also goes on.
Yes.
Sister Alice, if I can perhaps move to you. We've heard from Bishop and from Gabby, a layman, about formation, and you're actually studying in a place where young men are in formation. Do you have anything you want to comment about how we can prepare young seminarians to be better formed in a church where there's more expectations around safeguarding and care of children?
Thank you. I think we are living in a changing world. Gone are the days that maybe even the formation of the priesthood was different. We must agree to this reality. And if sometimes, we are saying abuses are taking place within maybe the young priests who maybe between 30 to 40, and that's when they're in their prime time. We have also to understand in our time what happened when they were in their own families. If abuses are taking place prevalent in the families, have these young men been guided on how their moral values would be, their spiritual life should be? Because you cannot give what you don't have. And I believe that, as my brother has said, the formation should not be that you must become a priest with the do's and the don'ts. We have to go back to the background of the cultural upbringing of these young men and begin helping them even psychologically how to cope up with the situations in the future. But also maybe the older priests who are already in the offices should become very, very helpful. As we are saying, child protection is our work. We should not mislead the children. And so, how are the older priests being useful to our young ones to guide them properly, not misleading them themselves and being, bad examples to them? And for example, if the parish priest who is older than me in his 60s and 70s is doing something that I feel is not good, I who is young is going to say, maybe that is of the day. I will follow it and uses in that time. So together, all of us, for me, I think, should join hands together in order to protect our young priests.
Sister, many, many thanks. At this stage, I'm going to ask each of you to answer one last question, but it has to be very brief. And if you speak too long, I will be very, very bad-mannered and I will interrupt. So, Bishop Herrera, a number of people have raised the issue of the McCarrick report. I'm sure you're aware of that from former Cardinal McCarrick in the United States. So if I could ask you to limit yourself just for 3 minutes and to say, what has been the impact of this report in this work of safeguarding and how the church should be learning from this report? So very briefly, if I can ask you, what can we be learning as a church from the McCarrick report?
Bueno, hermano, ya que me pides responderlo de forma muy rápida, solo voy a decirlo con una palabra: clericalismo. El informe McCarrick nos ha enseñado que hay una directa relación entre encubrimiento, cover-up, y las actitudes de clericalismo. Por eso debemos insistir en sanar y en liberar la iglesia, romper esas ataduras de este clericalismo institucional para evitar los abusos sexuales de poder y de conciencia. Y por último, ese clericalismo comienza con cosas muy pequeñas, con acciones muy, muy débiles que no se perciben al inicio y luego empiezan a extenderse como una bola de hielo.
Muchas gracias, Obispo. Excellent. Gabby, if I can turn to you now with a question. A number of people asked at the beginning of the chat how we can have programs to teach children about sexual awareness, sexual abuse, and to safeguard them. Also bearing in mind that their own parents may not have had the kind of formation that enables them to talk about it. And another person asked a question, is it a good thing to raise issues of sexual violence, abuse with young children? So maybe if you could give us a response to that, then I'll come to Sister Alice before we round up.
Yeah, sure. So the short answer is the programs need to be done in collaboration with the parents, and often first, the parents themselves, as you pointed out, need to be trained, need to be given the formation. And the second part is that the parents and these programs need to be delivered using the languages and images at the level of the children. You know? So they need not be graphic or explicit. There is a way that children can understand at their level in their languages using the images that are healthy for them and helpful to them. But it does require the help of the parents. So one aspect of safeguarding is to form parents, not so much in the theology of it, but in these very practical aspects of living a Christian life in a family and of safeguarding. Because the parents will need permission to talk about this first, especially amongst themselves and with their children, for it to be effective within the family. So that's my short answer. I also want to take this time to thank Sister Alice for the references to canon law, how safeguarding, where it can be seen in the canon law. I think that's very powerful. People often forget canon law is a theology. It's a theology first before a set of codes and principles. And these references are extremely helpful, I think, and they'll be helpful to me in my work as well. Thank you.
Gabby, many thanks. As you know, our mutual friend, Baroness Sheila Hollins, has a series of books without words to help children to begin to explore these things. And that's a wonderful way because the children look at the images and they put the words that they know rather than being given words by someone else. And it's a wonderful system. If anyone wants more, you can find out. Sister Alice, if I can ask you a very quick question. One person asked a question, if we become aware of abuse, should we report to church authorities or to state authorities first? What should we do?
I would say even the canon law provide for civil law, that where civil law has already given some sanctions that are, sufficient, then it is better for them to go on. Because right now, abuses of minors, if you see critically, is not treated by the church. It is civil. And among the church leaders, we have already known many clerics who have already served sentences of child abuse, sexual child abuse in the courts of law. And therefore, the civil law takes precedence as far as the abuses of minors are concerned. And maybe the church goes with a dismissal of these perpetrators from their offices.
Yeah. Sister, many thanks for your very clear and focused answer. I'm now going to go to each of our presenters and ask them to state very briefly, what's the one point you would like the participants to take away from our round table today? If they take one thing from your presentation and questions, what is it? And while you're thinking, let me add that all of the questions will be harvested and held later, and those of us working in this will go through them and use the questions that have not been responded to guide the structure of some future presentations. So they will not be lost, they will not be forgotten. So if I could ask maybe Bishop Herrera, if you're there, what's the one thing you'd like people to take away from the presentation today?
Bishop Herrera had to leave, so...
Okay,
yes.
well, Bishop Herrera has disappeared. So Gabby, I need to ask you, what's the thing you'd like people to take away from the presentations today?
Yeah, in terms of safeguarding ministry and enculturation, for safeguarding to be effective in any particular culture, it must be enculturated. There is no, to use the American phrase, there is no one size fits all. I hope that translates. It must be enculturated because it needs to come from the hearts of those who are implementing safeguarding. If it's not spoken and delivered in the quote unquote language of love and affection and meaning of the culture, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. For example, in the church, our language of love is spirituality. So it's extremely important when forming people who are professionals in the church, priests, religious, to contextualize safeguarding in the language of love, of our love, the spirituality, relationship with God. Yeah? And yeah, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks, Gabby. I was just going to add, with one of my colleagues, when we do workshops with priests, as we did in the Philippines in January, what was really important was when they began to see safeguarding not as a carbuncle on top of their ministry, but as part of their ministry. They began to see it differently. It's not.
Yes, in fact, I would say as part of their basic Christian vocation and the deepening of that vocation in their specific call to priesthood or religious life.
That was certainly our experience, and it transformed the reception of the message.
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Sister Alice, what would you like people to take away from your presentation today? What key thing is the point you want them to hear?
I would like to advocate for each and every one to join the formulators of the laws that the family is the best place for a child to be grown. And let us all support the family. And together, as church leaders, let us not be the main perpetrators of abuses of children, because we are guardians of these children. Thank you.
Sister, many thanks. Can I just check with Claudia or Rosanna, will the presentations be available to people after the webinar?
Yes, they will.
Yes, they will. So this has been recorded.
Yes.
Presentations will be available. All of the chat comments have been harvested and will be looked at afterwards. So none of that will be lost in the listening and the reflection and the planning that will happen afterwards. It's now my job to say it's been a pleasure to be with you and to see people whom I've known and to be contacting across the world. and to be united in our work of safeguarding with these very important issues of culture, formation, training, and responding. So it's been a pleasure. My sincere thanks. Now I hand over, I think, to Sister Pat.
Thank you very much indeed. It's my pleasure at this stage to thank all the presenters, to thank Bishop Herrera, to thank also Professor Di Liaco and Sister Alice and Father Brendan Geary our brother Brendan Geary for moderating this event. I think it's very important that we have looked at the topic of safeguarding and enculturation. And I think it's very important today when you look that the child was put very much at the center of all presentations. We looked at very much the negative areas in which children are made vulnerable in different contexts, whether it was Latin America, Africa, or Asia. And I think we also looked at the social, the cultural, the psychological, and the legal canonical perspectives. And I think I would just like to highlight some aspects as we finish. Bishop Herrera reminded us that lack of knowledge, denial, and the growth of permissiveness are things that we have to tackle, and that it's key that the family, the school, the church, and the digital worlds work together. And I think we probably have to add to that, and the legal worlds work together. In terms of the psychological perspectives, Gabby really outlined for us the need for conversation about cultural values, both the principles and the practices. And I think if we're to tackle this whole area, we really do have to have conversations that matter as part of formation programs. Often the knowledge is input, but and that input is important, that knowledge is given, but it also has to be internalized and shared and reflected on both at an individual level and in groups, so that we look at and test and discern about the principles and the practices. And I was very interested that Bishop Herrera gave us examples of where the child or young people are made the subjects of their own formation and growth. And I think this is important, and the roles that they can play in society and in creating a safeguarding environment. And finally, the whole area of the legal canonical perspectives, which Sister Alice outlined for us. She mentioned the continuum of care, looking after children who are at risk in society. And I just would like to say that the UISG has a new initiative called Catholic Care for Children International, which aims at helping religious congregations of women and men to move from children who are in orphanages and could well be supported by a kinship or family-like or family-based environment. So I think we have to look at many aspects of this challenge, this area of protection and safeguarding. So it's on all your behalves. Can I thank our presenters and assure you that the questions you have raised, as Brother Brendan said, will be taken for further consideration, and both the Vatican Commission for Care and Safeguarding and the Joint Commission of the two unions will process these and used for further work.